Our next speaker, like Jack, is an advocate of open source practices, and like Jack, he thinks out of the box, but Steve Castellotti thinks literally out of the box. His current passion is brain-computer interface, and I think if the Skim girls were still here, they would call it, really quickly, mind over matter. So Steve, I know you're up there someplace. There you go. Oh, okay.
How you guys going? All right. Cool. So my name's Steve Castellotti, and I'm from Puzzlebox. And about 10 years ago, I saw what I'm about to show you now, which at the time was certainly the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So what we have here is this is real time. And this is an experiment out of the Wadsworth Institute in Albany. And this is what you can see is someone steering, too fast. Someone steering a mouse cursor with their brain using an EEG. This is non-invasive surgery. It's pretty impressive how fast they're able to hit the targets. You can even see sometimes they kind of miss and veer off in the wrong direction and then correct themselves, and they're able to hit it with pretty decent accuracy within an average about 2 seconds or so. So I saw this on a Slashdot article back around 2004, 2005, and was just blown away. I couldn't believe that you could do this with just the brain. And right away, I wanted to dive in and get involved and do whatever I could to sort of pull that together. And interestingly enough, I guess that video was 10 years ago, about a decade ago. This video is from last week. So this is what I ended up doing. This is a brain controller. And there you go. All right. So this is a third grade class over in Mountain View. So I'm going to give you guys a quick rundown of exactly what's going on here. And this is sort of the 10-year-old explanation, so it's not completely accurate, so just kind of bear that in mind. But basically what you can see here is a brainwave. So up at the top, you can see an eye blink. You can see that giant ridge right in the middle. And I guess the most important thing to bear in mind through all of this is that we are trying to measure EEG, which is your brain waves. You can imagine a very small cluster of neurons about the size of a needle point, all clustered together, and messages are firing back and forth. And if you blink or move or run around or anything else, you're going to create EMG, which is muscles twitching, and it's a good order of magnitude larger than the EEG. So the first thing people ask when we start doing this is legitimate? Yeah, it's legitimate, but if you're moving around and if you're on a treadmill or anything else, it's not quite going to work. So the EEG that we currently use is pretty much the most simple that you can get. This is one by NeuroSky. And an EEG in its essence is a voltmeter. It's just measuring electricity, nothing else. It happens to be very, very small amounts of electricity on the microvolt scale, so millionths of a volt. And the way I like to explain it is when you are thinking, moving, acting, there's messages going back and forth through your brain. And those messages are exchanged and passed on through chemical and electrical processes. So you can imagine this voltmeter, instead of measuring a battery from your remote control, it's measuring messages as they pass by. So this one is a single sensor electrode, and most neuroscience scientists would say this is good for noise, but actually it's decent enough for what we're trying to do. And what you have is a single electrode on the forehead, right over the prefrontal cortex. That's the area of the brain responsible for conscious thought. And there is a clip that goes on your ear, which is a ground and reference. The ground closes the circuit, and the reference allows us to remove noise from the environment. So, for example, fluorescent lights and mobile phones and all sorts of electronics are casting off little bits of electricity as well, and that noise needs to get filtered out. So we take a measurement from the forehead, we take a measurement at the ear. The noise is going to be present at both. We subtract one from the other, we just get the forehead. So this particular headset takes measurements 512 times a second. That's what you can see right here. Sometimes the firing is happening, the voltage is high, sometimes it's low, and you get this wave as you graph this out. So again, I usually explain this to kids, but these are waves. Basically, if you start at, can we get a mouse cursor here? Maybe not. If you start in the middle, you go up to the top, you go all the way down to the bottom, you come back to the middle again. If you do that in 1 second, that's 1 cycle, that's 1 hertz. If you do it twice, you can see the upper right, that's 2 hertz, 10 hertz, and so on. So waves that we have like this don't quite match up to the waves that are sort of carved out very nicely here with the program. They look a bit more like the one up the top. And so what's actually going on there, if you kind of notice, if you were to count the ridges of every one of those waves, you would get the number 30 because there is a 30 hertz signal in this particular wave. If you notice, there's sorts of pairs, and if you were to count those, you get 15. If you sort of blur your eyes, you can see, again, it's a shame I don't have a cursor here, but you can see the whole sort of structure. There's a repeating pattern. It all goes up and comes down and goes up and comes down. You have 4 different signals in this one wave. So with one brainwave, you can actually have different ranges of signal, and that's what we're trying to measure. The way we pull that out, we run a bit of math called a Fourier transform. Any engineer would tell you that the graph on the bottom is not an actual Fourier transform, but it's a nice mock-up for kids. But basically, we run some math on the brainwave that we're recording, and you can pull out some of this data. Now, what we do with this is we are trying to measure specifically attention. That seemed to be the easiest thing that we could pull out of this noisy data, and it seemed to be something useful for kids to practice. There's a principle called neuroplasticity, by which if you do things repeatedly, the brain actually rewires, the neurons physically migrate to reinforce the things you do a lot. So if you're a kid, I'll tell you the first time you rode a bicycle, you're worried about keeping your balance and pedaling and steering and all these things at once. But after you do this enough times, you don't even think about it. Your mind just sort of handles that for you. For an adult, I usually mention if you drive a stick shift, same deal. Trying to work out the clutch and drive and all the rest. You really have to concentrate on getting the timing just right the first few times you do it. But after time goes by, neuroplasticity kicks in, and you're able to do it without thinking. So the idea here is if we can pull out a measurement of attention, can we use this to help kids learn how to focus? So when I was in college, I happened to work at a private elementary school that had access to Lego Mindstorms, these nice little $300 kits that you can program. The kids who are 7th graders, they would do first Lego League, which is this sort of international competition. They'd be given little tasks, and they'd learn how to program by building robots and so forth. So what we ended up doing was I would go and I'd visit classrooms. The school that I worked at, we spent a whole semester there. But basically, we'd give the kids a chance to break into groups, usually about 4 or 5. And we'd allow the kids to decide who was going to do what role in each group. Often, you might have one kid who's a little more competitive, and he's the one who wants to race the car. Maybe another child is a little more artistic. They want to design the robot. Maybe somebody else is a little more analytical. They want to record the data. So what we ended up doing was the 7th grade teacher had to teach a course on waves. So I gave sort of a rough sketch like I just gave before, something that a 10-year-old could understand. And the kids would break into groups. They would measure each other's attention over time. All the data was created by or collected by an open source program that I wrote called Brainstorms. The kids were able to measure their own attention, how quickly they were able to get focused, how long they were able to maintain focus, and they would race each other, and then they would have competitions at the end of each week. And over the course of the entire semester, they collected all the data, and they were able to show who was able to improve their ability to get focused and who was able to maintain that focus the longest. We used that measurement as a throttle for the robots. So basically what we do is we sit the kids down, and we tell them that it doesn't matter what they think, because we can't tell that, but it matters that they can get focused using any sort of exercise that worked for them. So for example, it might be saying the alphabet backwards. It might be subtracting from 100 by 7s. It might be thinking of all the streets in their neighborhood. all the different names. Sometimes it's, if you're going to go on a trip for a month, what are you going to pack? And where are those things in your house? The idea is to give an activity that's going to be continuous. So once you get into that zone, you're going to be able to maintain it over time. And after the software was released, I started getting videos and images from kids all over the world. This is a Cub Scout group over in England. And after we were able to sort of hack apart these different things, the next thing was to see, well, what else can we hack? What else can we brain control? So ended up doing a whole series of projects to see what could be taken apart and use this brain control as a switch. So this is the remote control for a car. This is an actual car, but the point of the picture is the crane in the background. We ended up getting asked to do a stunt for a television show where we moved a 62-ton crane lifting up a Volkswagen around a warehouse over in England. And we had the show hosts use their brain control to maneuver this car. And we actually established a Guinness World Record for that, which was kind of fun. So after that, we started setting things on fire, because pyrokinesis is fun. Connected with an art collective over in San Francisco who does these giant sculptures for Burning Man. And we did 68 fireballs that would ignite when you were focused. So we'd have somebody sit down in various mental states, and they would try to focus. And the more focused they were, the larger the fireballs would get. And that kind of looks like this. So. And then we moved on to some more practical things. The first thing that everyone always suggests is, why don't you hack a wheelchair? So can you control a wheelchair with this? We ended up doing, this is me and a partner named Hal, who we did this brain-controlled helicopter project with. Basically took a wheelchair, added on a robotic arm, and set up some programs so that you could both drive the wheelchair by brain power, or you could remotely control it and use it to, say, grab a beer from the kitchen. Now, this is all fun and interesting and so forth, but I guess the most important thing about hacking a wheelchair is that it's almost completely useless, at least the way that we did it. The problem being is that you need to be focused the whole time you're operating this. If you're trying to concentrate and the dog runs out in front of you, or you run into an obstacle or anything else happens, it just doesn't work. There's no way to change your brain state fast enough to react to this. So we ended up working with this a little bit more. And I'll talk about some of the other ways you can do brain control in a second, and describing what we actually did to make this a little more practical. But in the meantime, we were still having lots and lots of fun. However, so for all the different things we hacked, from blenders to fireballs to wheelchairs and everything else, the one that everyone seemed to respond to best was a helicopter. I actually had somebody ask me, could you hack a helicopter to be brain controlled? And I told them, of course, and went off and tried to figure out how. Ended up learning about what a hackerspace was, visited a place called Noise Bridge in San Francisco. I would assume most of you have heard of hackerspaces before. If you haven't, the general idea is it's a giant open space. It's run as a 501c3 nonprofit. It's paid for by the members paying dues, and it's basically full of donated and purchased equipment. So there's everything from industrial sewing machines, if you wanted to make clothing, a full kitchen for cooking classes, and lots of electronics. So I just sort of rocked up one day and brought the remote control with me, as a matter of fact. I didn't even actually have the whole helicopter. And was able to, in the space of about 2 weeks, met up with a bunch of hardware hackers, and we put together this hack to have the kids fly this helicopter with their brain. So again, what's going on here is we're measuring these brain waves, and we're running a bit of analysis, and we're looking for concentration. And classically, that falls in the beta range, which means between 12 and 30 hertz. And we look at the rolling average of, say, the last 5 seconds. And we use this. The kids were doing their Legos, they were doing the robots and so forth. And of course, once the hack was done, that was all fun and that was all well and good, but it's not very useful unless someone else can reproduce this. At the time, we didn't have a product. We weren't trying to make money off of any of this. We were just trying to get stuff out there. So this is sort of some highlights from an Instructables document, which literally goes through every single part of the process, from unboxing the remote control to pulling out the circuits to how to use an oscilloscope to how to use a logic analyzer, all the different components that you need to be able to take the remote control for anything and hack it to be controlled, whether by brainwaves or Arduinos or whatever else. So again, that's all cool, but what can you actually do with this? And what's coming next? So if you can do focus, and it's going to be based on a rolling 5-second average, it's not going to work right away. If you sit down and you start to focus, it can be up to 5 seconds before the helicopter takes off. And you can't steer it. There's not enough information there, especially with a single channel electrode over the frontal cortex. There's just not enough information there to determine intent. But that's what everyone wants to do. And of course, as you saw in the video at the beginning, that is possible. The question is, how long is it going to take before the consumer-grade EEGs are able to do that sort of technology? So to explain how you would actually steer, we're going to use a different part of the brain. So instead of the forehead, sort of the prefrontal cortex, we're going to use the sensory motor cortex. And that's a ridge that runs right across the top of the brain, basically where you would wear headphones. And it's responsible for all of the movements of your body. So when you, for example, tap your feet, dead center at the top of your head, there's a bunch of neurons that fire. And if you were to imagine, say, grabbing a tennis ball, just over to the opposite side of the brain along that same strip, there would be a bunch of neurons lighting up. And vice versa for the other hand. Well, it turns out if you imagine grabbing the tennis ball, if you imagine tapping your feet, the same neurons fire. So you can actually steer an interface or manipulate an object by imagining hand and feet gestures. This is an example from software called OpenVibe from INRIA, a sort of IT place over in France. And this is someone in real time trying to steer down a hallway. Now, again, this works. It's kind of cool. But he's having a hard time. This is not very fast. This is not very elegant. And if you can imagine we're trying to drive our wheelchair with this, it's not going to be very, very helpful. So the solution that they came up with, and sort of what we replicated, will be coming up in just a second, which is where you use slalom poles to sort of highlight where you want to go. So in this case, if you were to do this in real life, you'd use augmented reality. But you would decide, OK, I want to go to the yellow pole, so I hit the right hand that's going to take me to the yellow pole. And this way, you can, with just a couple instructions, you can maneuver all the way down a hallway. So the next way that you can interface with brain control is another paradigm called the P300. And this uses the parietal lobe. This is an area of the back of the brain that's responsible for pattern matching. And basically, if you can imagine you've lost your car in a parking lot, and you're walking up and down rows of cars, and your brain is matching, there's a car, there's a car, there's a car, there's my car. And that moment where the light bulb goes off and you actually recognize the thing that you're looking for in this random sequence, there's a spike in energy. There's a spike in electrical potential. It happens on average about 300 milliseconds after you see the thing. So you see your car, 300 milliseconds later, there's a spike in the parietal lobe. And we can use this as an indicator. Now, the way that this is classically used, so first of all, the P300 was discovered in 1964. In 1988, there was Dr. Lawrence Farwell who started using this for spelling. And the way that this works is you have a bunch of letters up on the screen in a grid, and they flash very fast, and they flash randomly. The randomness is key here. And say you're trying to spell the word dog, you look at the letter D, and every once in a while, D lights up, and every time that it does, 300 milliseconds later, there's a spike in the parietal lobe, and we're able to match that. So this is used for people with ALS who are locked in, who are physically paralyzed because of muscular degenerative diseases. The Wadsworth Institute, who's developing a lot of this technology, this is exactly what they're using it for. And in fact, this example is a professor who runs his entire lab through this interface. So he's composing an email message in real time, and there's a bit of there's a bit of a word list that you would just find on like a cell phone to sort of to speed it up a little bit. So the way we ended up tapping into this for our wheelchair is we produced a floor plan of a house, or in our case, the hackerspace. And instead of trying to steer by thinking right hand, left hand, feet, and so forth to move from the dining area to the kitchen and so on, instead we have the floor plan of the entire room with each room lighting up randomly. So instead of trying to steer to the kitchen, you just tell the robot, oh, I want to go to the kitchen. That's a lot easier. We can use computer vision. We can use all sorts of other robotics like ROS and other algorithms to be able to steer this robot to where it wants to go. Once it's there, we can use, again, augmented reality to say, OK, here's the different appliances in the kitchen. We're going to have them light up very quickly. There's the fridge. OK, the robot goes to the fridge. It opens the door. You see all the things inside there. You grab the orange juice and take it back to me. Now you have a whole complex series of commands which only requires 4 interactions from the user. And if this is someone who's locked in, if this is someone who's actually going to use this, that's far more efficient. Let's see, is this a video? So we, of course, took this, and I have an example here, if it plays. So here's our wheelchair robot, and we're actually using P300 in this instance to steer it directly. This was a student from the University of Minneapolis. He designed a fairly novel algorithm. We tapped it into our software. And what's actually happening here is he's using just the P300 to steer the robot around. So you can see the directions are blinking rapidly when the direction that's desired is highlighted. The user's able to select that, and you're able to maneuver things actually quite quickly. And of course, later we tap this into our helicopter as well. So all of these things that we're doing to sort of explore what the researchers are doing, we want to expose this to consumers, and we want to expose this to hackers by making all this open source. So every time we do one of these hacks, we release all the information, we release all the details, all the plans, except for the fire one, because that would be a bad idea. And we encourage people to sort of to reproduce this stuff. So next up, another way to interact with a computer is called SSVEP, Steady State Visually Evoked Potential. And basically what that means is when things blink, you can tell when things blink, in order to see it, your brain has to harmonize with that blinking. And if you have several different patterns or lights that are all blinking at the same time, you can pick out which of those different patterns someone is looking at. So this is, I believe, Northwestern University. If you look closely, there's 4 different checkerboard patterns. They're all blinking at different rates. And with this one, depending on which checkerboard that you're looking at, there's a harmony at the occipital lobe. That's where visual processing happens. You can pick that up. So if you have it blinking, say, 10 times a second, you'll see a 10 hertz signal back here. If the bottom one is 15 hertz, and you switch your gaze to the 15 hertz signal, you'll be able to pick that up as well. Now, the nice thing about SSVEP is it doesn't require any training or any thought. It just happens automatically. It's part of the way your visual processing works. One of the challenges for all of these other things I've showed you so far is that they require a lot of training. So specifically, the sensory motor cortex, where you're steering in multiple directions, that person at the very, very beginning, that first video you saw, that's after 20 to 30 hours of training. That's a huge challenge, especially if you're going to try to make a consumer product. The P300, not so bad. You can usually get a decent efficiency within the first maybe half hour of training. It still takes many sessions to get very proficient at it. Of course, the P300, again, the other problem is you're not measuring characters per second. It's seconds per character. It's very slow if you actually want to type out a message. But in this case, this person's just looking at blinking patterns, and they're able to move a robot around. We're currently doing experiments with SSVEP and Google Glass, using it as a mechanism to basically do gaze detection so that you can navigate an interface without having to use your hands or without having to do any extra processing. If you had an eye tracker built into the Google Glass, that would probably be a more efficient way of doing it, but currently there's no camera that's aiming back that way. So we're using that as a bit of a shortcut. And then the last way that is sort of easy and low-hanging fruit, this is, again, out of Wadsworth Institute. This is using auditory processing. So what this person is doing is they have headphones on, and there's 2 different tones, or you can use 2 different songs that are playing in each side of the headphones. And depending on which one you are paying attention to, we can pick that up in the EEG signal of your brainwaves. So this is playing back right now at 8 times speed. But basically what he's doing is playing Pong, or Arkanoid, or Breakout, by listening to different tones. We're trying to adapt this now for children that are very, very high spectrum autism. We're trying to do this because it can be very difficult to communicate with the kids. They don't necessarily respond. What we're doing is we're playing different voices in different ears, and every once in a while we put in one of their parents' voices. And we can tell when they can recognize which voice that they're paying attention to, and sort of we can sort of tell whether or not they're able to recognize their mother's voice or their father's voice. And this is just sort of an easy way to work that out. So again, back to the consumer stuff. This is the NeuroSky headset, single sensor, a bit noisy, not a lot of data. You can get attention off of this. You can also get a measurement of sort of mental clarity and meditation. There is a more advanced headset that came out also a few years ago. This one is from Emotive. And this one actually has 14 electrodes. This guy right here. The only problem with this guy, if you notice, right here where the sensory motor cortex is, there's no sensors. Back here where the parietal lobe is, when you're wearing this, there's no sensors. So this headset, although it has lots and lots of data coming out of it, it's not enough for you to actually be able to do the really interesting stuff. You need more of a research-grade EEG, which is along these lines. So,
Who's going to put that on?
what's
Who's going to put it on?
Cool. So this guy is using comb sensors. I hope you can see this. Instead of using gel and instead of using very, very messy techniques, this one you can just pop right on and you're able to do your measurements pretty quickly. Again, this thing acts as a bit more of an antenna than anything else because it's dry, but the sensor technologies are coming along very, very quickly. I think what you're going to see next, incidentally, this guy cost us about 15 grand 3 years ago. This will let you do the sensory motor control. There is now a headset from Neuroelectrics over in Spain, costs about $4,000. I would say give it another couple years and you'll start to see these headsets with the correct placement getting the data that you want out of this and then being able to do the multiple degrees of control. And I think the first way you're going to see that is recently there was a Kickstarter campaign, OpenBCI. They're using our Arduino-based technology, and they're using a chip from TI. It costs about $300 for the board. You still need to pick up the electrode somewhere, but for $300, you can start to do the sensory motor control and the P300 and all these other sorts of interesting techniques. And this is their 3D printed headset. So I believe we were the first backer of this, and we've been working with these guys to start tapping into this stuff, again, to use for the kids. But does anybody have any questions real quick?
Some questions for Steve? Mind control. Come on, this is pretty good stuff. Where's Jack, who wanted to control the mind of his biology teacher?
I've seen some work at the Hallowell Center where they have used something like this to try and help kids that have ADD learn how to focus.
Yep.
And so after they lift the airplane, what's the next step with what they need to focus on in order to have a longer sustained attention?
Sure. So again, the first thing is that you can't steer this with just the headsets that we're using. So we kind of got around that by using the tilt sensors in the tablet. And we start doing activities where the kids are trying to race each other across the room, or they're trying to navigate through a hula hoop, that sort of thing. So we use the attention, and it has to be above a certain threshold, as the trigger. And then once it's in the air, they have to maintain that focus. Whatever it was they were thinking about at the time, they have to maintain that stream of consciousness. And then they can steer and manipulate the helicopter. Most times, and you'll see a lot in this video, as soon as somebody gets into the air, ooh, helicopter in the air, they totally break their concentration and it falls back down again. So you actually have to block that out. We tried to add some really, really basic gamification where we have a scoring system. Basically, in the interface, we have a target, which is dynamic. We can set that for the user. When we work with young kids, we usually set it pretty low so that they'll get it the first time, and then they'll feel confident. Then we start to ramp up the difficulty. And the higher the level of difficulty, the more points you score every second.
One or two more?
Sure.
Hi, Steve. It's really fun and exciting to see what you're doing.
Cheers.
And I'm curious to know whether you have any insights as to how fun it is for kids to use their minds beyond the novelty and the wow factor of like seeing the power of your mind elevate the helicopter. What insights have you gained about the intrinsic fun of it for them?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a gimmick aspect to this, and we're trying to leverage that to get the kids interested. The main thing is we're trying to leverage this for education. So we're trying to say, okay, here's a brain-controlled helicopter. Go ahead and play with this. The natural play sort of evolves that it only works when you're focused and so on. It's something that they can understand. And then we have to add that competition aspect. We have to have a couple different kids either doing, say, tug of war with one helicopter where we're trying to outfocus one another. We've done one where it's relaxation-based. So you can measure the mental clarity and relaxation, and if you are more relaxed and more calm, the helicopter or the robot, we usually use the Legos for that, starts moving towards you. But if you start getting excited because you're winning, then you start to lose, and it starts going back to the other kid. So basically by adding that competitive aspect, that's been the way that's worked out best. Everybody wants to try it at least once, and everybody really enjoys it once, but in order to keep them coming back, we need to keep on adding more interesting ways to interact.
Okay, one last for Michael.
Yeah, hi there. This is extraordinary stuff, actually. And my question is just a quick statement. I'm working currently on an app that uses music for communication skills for severely autistic children. So making the leap from the app where they'll, with use of music, what have you seen or are you working on or who have you spoken to about the use of this, not for necessarily the movement of helicopters left, right, and right, but for communication skills where either someone who's disabled in some way who can communicate or not disabled but can be using this. I mean, I could imagine a leap where you could be using this to write, to speak, to do all kinds of things, right? I mean,
yeah, so the P300, like the speller, that was specifically designed for people who are locked in who aren't able to communicate otherwise. There's a variation on that that uses the SSVEP, so you have the letters flashing very, very fast, not the random one, but just they're all flashing at different rates. They're able to get up to 64 different characters at different signals. There is a lot of work in that area. Part of the problem is that you have to understand, especially, let's say the sensory motor cortex, right? You're thinking about tennis balls and tapping your feet, and we're using the fact that you're doing that as the trigger mechanism. And that's good, but if you had a joystick or a keyboard, or say, Stephen Hawking is still using his thumb, he still has a little bit of motor control left, that's far more efficient than using just the brain waves. There's only a very narrow band in the life of one of these patients where everything else is out of the picture, everything else is off the table, and this is the only way for this person to communicate. And it's sort of towards the end of the cycle. ALS usually is about 4 to 5 years as life expectancy after diagnosis. And it's only maybe 6 months or so that this is the only way that someone can communicate. As far as using it for autistic children, like I said, the only thing that we've done so far is having 2 different tones and try to listen to the parents' voices.
Sorry, we're trying to do our best to catch up. Steve will be around for the next couple of days.
Yeah.
However long we'll be here, he'll be here. So if you have questions,
He'll
please.
also be, Claire, he'll also be at a demo table tonight.
Oh, that's right.
Right, so if you guys want to give this a try yourself, we'll have it at the demo
Great.
table. And
Terrific.
we'll give it a
Okay,
go.
thank you, everyone, very much.
Cheers.